I left the pack on the night of the harvest moon, when every wolf with a name was inside the great hall, and no one was watching the western gate. I did not write a letter. I had spent 4 years learning that letters were for people whose absence would be noticed, and I had finally, mercifully, stopped being one of those people. I was 21 then. I am 25 now, and I am telling you this from the only house I have ever owned, so you already know it did not end the way the gate made it feel. The cottage sat at the far edge of the Iron Territories, in the band of forest that belonged to no pack because no pack wanted it, too rocky to farm, too far from the river, too close to the border to be safe. I had wanted exactly that. I built it with my own hands over 2 summers, which is to say, I built it badly the first summer and correctly the second, and I learned the difference by standing in the rain inside my own kitchen. I planted a garden. I learned which of the forest mushrooms would feed me and which would end the conversation entirely. I set a second chair at my table, and I do not know to this day why I did that. Except that a table with 1 chair is a table that has given up. And I had not given up. I had only left. For 5 years, I told myself those were the same thing. They were not. The morning he came, I was kneeling in the dirt with my hands full of onion tops, and the wind changed, and I knew, before I heard a single footstep, the way you know a storm is coming by the smell of the air before the sky agrees. Pine, iron, hearth smoke that did not come from my hearth. I did not turn around. I want to be honest about that, because it is the part I am least proud of, and the part that matters most. I knelt in my own garden with my back to the forest, and I closed my eyes, and I thought, very clearly, if I do not turn around, it is not real, and I can keep this. Wren. He said my name the way you set down something you have carried a long way and are afraid to break. I turned around. Soren, king of the Iron Territories, strongest wolf alive, the man whose hall I had walked out of without a word, was standing at the edge of my garden in a travelling cloak gone grey with road dust, looking at my cottage as though it had spoken to him. He looked older, not weaker. Soren did not do weaker, but worn in a way the crown had not managed in all the years I served in his halls. There was grey at his temple that had not been there. His hands were empty, which, on a king, is its own kind of statement. "You found it," I said. I want to tell you I said something clever. I had, over 5 years, composed perhaps 40 things to say to him if this impossible morning ever arrived, and every one of them was sharper than you found it. But that is what came out, because the truth underneath it was you came, and I was not ready to say that to anyone, least of all him. His jaw moved once before he found words. I had forgotten he did that, the small mechanical hitch before he spoke, like a man checking that a bridge would hold his weight. "I was not looking for it," he said. "I have not been looking for 5 years." I told myself I was not looking. He stopped. And then I was 3 days into a border patrol I did not need to ride. And the wind changed, and my wolf, he did not finish. His wolf had done something he could not finish a sentence about. I knew the feeling. We were, in that, a matched pair. "Sit down." I gestured at the bench with an onion top, which was not how I had imagined commanding the strongest wolf alive, if I had ever let myself imagine it at all. "You look like the road." I did not invite him in. I am telling you that on purpose. I gestured at the bench by the garden wall, the one I had built for no one, and he crossed my yard and sat on it with the careful slowness of a large man in a small place. And I went on pulling onions, because my hands needed something to do that was not shaking. That is how it started. Not with the gate, with the onions. He stayed 3 days that first time, and we did not talk about anything that mattered, which is how I knew everything mattered. We talked about the cottage. He wanted to know how I had set the roof beam alone, and I told him I had not, the first time, that the first roof had come down in the night and I had laughed until I cried, sitting in the wreckage, and built it right the second time. He listened to that story the way other men listen to battle reports. We talked about the garden. He knew nothing about gardens. A king does not. But he asked which plant was which, with a seriousness that should have been funny and somehow was not. And when I told him the tall one with the purple flower was for fever, he repeated the name back to himself under his breath, committing it to memory, as though he might one day be far from a healer and glad to know. We did not talk about why I left. We did not talk about the 4 years I had spent in his hall as a healer's apprentice, learning every corridor and every face, learning the precise shape of being looked through. We did not talk about the night of the harvest moon. On the 3rd evening, he stood in my doorway. He never came inside. He asked once with his eyes, and I did not answer, and he never asked again. And he looked at my table, and his face did something I had never seen it do in 4 years of court. There were 2 chairs. "You set a place," he said. "I set a chair," I said. "It is not the same thing." He looked at me for a long moment, and I understood that he had heard the thing I had not said, which was that I had set it years ago, before I had any reason to think he would ever stand in this doorway, and that I had never once moved it. He lingered in the doorway a moment longer, and I thought he would say the thing his face was clearly building toward, and then he did not. Instead, he reached into the breast of his cloak and set something on the edge of my table, just inside the threshold he would not cross, and stepped back. It was a book. Small, leather-worn, soft at the corners, the kind a man carries until it stops being an object and becomes a habit. "You said the first roof came down in the night," he said, "and you laughed." He looked at the book and not at me. There is a chapter in there on setting a beam alone. I do not know if it is correct. I am not a builder. But I marked it, in case you ever build a 3rd roof, and I am not here to ask you which plant is which. I picked it up. The page he had marked was dog-eared, and then, beneath the dog-ear, underlined. Not the building chapter at all, but a single line 3 pages further on, about how a house holds the shape of the hands that made it. This is not the roof chapter. His jaw moved once. "No," he admitted. "I marked the wrong one. I have read it a great many times, and I still marked the wrong one." He pulled his cloak straight, a man retreating in good order. "Keep the book, regardless." I kept the book. I have it still. I never told him I found the 2nd underline, the one he did not mention, the one on the page about the kinds of silence a house can hold. "Some things you keep." "I will come back," he said. It was not a question. "I know," I said. And he did. Here is the part I cannot quite explain, even now. And if you have stayed with me this far, stay a little longer, because this is where I stopped understanding my own story and started living it. If you are enjoying her, subscribe and stay. I promise the part with the letters is worth it. He came back at the turn of every season. Spring, when the road thawed. High summer, dust on his boots. Autumn, with the first cold in the air. Winter, always winter, the hardest ride, the one a king had no business making. He never explained it. I never asked. We had built, without either of us proposing it, a thing that lived in the gaps between his visits, and to name it would have been to risk it. And we were both, I understood this slowly, people who had already lost enough things to careless naming. It was on his fourth visit, the second winter, that I found the first one. He had ridden in ahead of a storm, and the storm had won. And for the first time, he did not stand in my doorway and refuse to enter. He could not. The snow would have killed a lesser man, and I am not sentimental enough to let pride do what the cold could finish. I opened the door. He came in. He sat in the second chair, the one I had set for no one, and he filled it the way water fills a cup it was made for, and I did not look at that too closely. In the morning, while he slept by my banked fire like a felled tree, his saddlebag had fallen open. I am not a woman who goes through a guest's belongings, but a folded paper had slid half out onto my floor, and it had my name on it, in his hand, and a person can only be expected to do so much. It was a letter, dated the first winter I was gone, never sent. I did not read past my own name. I want that on the record. I read Wren in his careful, blocky king's hand, and I saw beneath it lines and lines of writing, and I folded it back and slid it into the bag and sat down in my own kitchen, with my heart doing something complicated. When he woke, I poured him the bitter tea he pretended to like, and I said, conversationally, to the fire, "How many are there?" He went very still. Soren did stillness the way mountains do it. "How many what?" "Letters." I kept my eyes on the fire. "With my name on them, that you did not send." The silence went on long enough that I thought he might lie, and I found I could not bear it if he lied, which told me something I was not ready to know. "One for every season," he said finally, "since you left." His hands were flat on my table. I did not know where to send them, and then I knew, this past summer, when I found this place. I had known for a while, I think, where you were. I let myself not know it. He looked at the fire instead of me. "I have written you a letter at the turn of every season for 2 years, and ridden out to a border I did not need, and never once let myself come to your door until the wolf made the choice for me. That is the kind of king I am. I can sign a death warrant without my hand shaking. I cannot knock on a healer's door. I have been told, by people who knew me in the hall, that I am difficult to surprise. They are correct. I sat in my kitchen and was surprised down to the soles of my feet. "Why did you not send them?" "Because a sent letter asks for an answer," he said, and I did not think I had earned one. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table, a thing he did when the words were hard. "You served 4 years in my hall, Wren, and I looked through you exactly as everyone else did, because looking at you was a thing I did not have permission to do. And then you were gone, and the hall was the same hall, and I could not be in it. This is the part I cannot explain. I had left because I was invisible. I had spent 5 years certain of it, certain enough to build a life on it like a foundation. And he had spent the same 5 years writing to the woman he had not been able to look at. We had been, all that time, 2 people standing in the same dark room, each certain they were alone in it. I should tell you about Ingrid, because she is the reason any of this nearly did not end the way it did. Lady Ingrid was the daughter of the Iron Territory's wealthiest banner house, and she had spent her whole life understanding, with the serene certainty of the very well-born, that she would be Luna. It was not vanity, it was arithmetic. Her bloodline, her father's swords, the king's need for the alliance, it all added up to a crown. And Ingrid was very good at arithmetic. She was the reason I had been invisible. I understood that now, the way you understand a chess game after it is lost. 5 years ago, when a healer's apprentice with no name had started to draw the king's eye in a way the king himself did not notice, it had been Lady Ingrid who arranged for that apprentice to be assigned to the far infirmary, the night shifts, the work that kept her out of the hall. It had been Ingrid, I would learn, who let a particular rumour breathe, that the apprentice was leaving, had spoken of leaving, was ungrateful and restless, and gone in spirit already. She had not pushed me out the gate. She had simply made the hall a place where leaving felt like the only choice I had made for myself in 4 years. And I had walked through her trap, thinking it was a door. She found out about the cottage in the 3rd year. Of course she did. Kings are watched, and a king who rides a pointless border patrol every season is watched harder. The first move she made, I did not see coming. Soren had brought me to the hall, openly, for the first time, for the spring convocation, the great gathering where the banner houses renew their oaths. He brought me as a guest, seated me in the lower hall, and did not announce what I was to him, because we had not yet found the word for it ourselves. I thought I was anonymous. I had spent 4 years being anonymous in that hall. I was an expert. Ingrid found me in the lower hall before the oaths began. "The healer's girl," she said, looking at me the way you look at a stain you thought you had removed. "I had heard you crawled off to die in the woods. How resourceful of you to merely hide there instead." "Lady Ingrid," I said. "He will tire of the novelty," she said, pleasantly, the way you would comment on weather. "A king who has tasted a banner house alliance does not subsist on cottage fare. You were forgettable enough the first time. Do not imagine the second showing improves the performance." She smiled. "I would leave tonight if I were you. Spare yourself the public version of being looked through. I understand you found it difficult enough in private." And here is what she did, the move I did not see. She had timed it. She said all of this where the wives of 3 banner houses could hear it, and she said it loud enough. And then she stepped back, so that the silence she had created had me at its centre, the woman from the woods, the king's embarrassment, and every eye in the lower hall turned to watch me absorb it. I will tell you honestly, it nearly worked. I felt the old invisibility close over my head like water. I felt 21 again. I felt the gate. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I have never been able to make my voice do what hers did, and I had stopped wishing I could. "You are right that he looked through me," I said, into the silence she had built for me. "For 4 years. I left because of it." I let that sit. But a woman who has been invisible learns to see. And what I see, Lady Ingrid, is that you have spent 5 years arranging a marriage to a man who has spent 5 years riding 3 days out of his way to sit in a garden. You did the arithmetic. You only forgot to ask him for the sum. I walked out of the lower hall. Not the gate this time. The front doors, in full view, my own choice, my own pace. I heard later that Ingrid did not speak again for the rest of the convocation. I am not above admitting that this pleased me. The second move was not a word. The second move nearly killed me. It was the following winter, the 5th winter, the one this whole story has been walking toward. Soren had ridden out to the cottage ahead of the long frost, and a fever had come into the border villages, the kind that takes the old and the young first. And I had gone with him back toward the hall, to help the healers, because I was a healer before I was anything to him, and I do not stop being what I am because a king is fond of me. Ingrid by then had run out of arithmetic. She had watched her certain future ride away on a border patrol 4 seasons running, and a woman who has built her whole life on a sum that no longer adds has only 2 choices, which are to accept the new total or to break the slate. She broke the slate. She came to the infirmary where I worked among the fever sick, and she came as a friend. That was the cruelty of it. Bearing wine for the healers who had not slept in 3 days, and I, exhausted past suspicion, nearly drank it. I had the cup in my hand. I had it at my lips. It was the smell that stopped me. Pine. Iron. Not him. The other pine. The false one. The scent of monkshood crushed and steeped, which a healer knows the way you know the face of an old enemy. Monkshood in wine smells almost like nothing. Almost. You have to have spent 4 years in a far infirmary learning the plants no one else bothers to learn to catch the almost. I set the cup down. My hand did shake then. I will not pretend otherwise. "Lady Ingrid," I said, to the woman watching me from the doorway with her certain, serene face. "You have steeped the wolfsbane too long. It has gone bitter. A guest might notice." I watched her understand that I had caught it. I watched the serenity go out of her face like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. What I did next, I did because I was a healer and because 3 other healers in that room had also been poured that wine and had not spent 4 years in a far infirmary. I did not run. I did not scream for the king. I took the cup and the jug, and I named what was in it, loudly, to the whole infirmary, so that no one else would lift a glass. And then the cost came, because she was not going to let herself be named without a fight. And Ingrid, who had run out of arithmetic, reached for the knife at a healer's tray. I put myself between it and the fever-sick who could not rise from their cots. The blade opened my forearm to the bone. I remember the cold of it more than the pain. A deep, driving cold, the way old iron is cold, the way the gate had been cold. I remember gripping the edge of the cot hard enough that the splinters bit my palm, blood from 2 places now, and thinking with absolute clarity, I did not build a cottage and learn the mushrooms and set a second chair to die on a hall floor for this woman's arithmetic. I stayed standing. That was the cost, and I paid it. I kept my body between the knife and the helpless until the guards Ingrid had not accounted for, because she had done arithmetic, not strategy, took her arms. Soren came through the infirmary doors at a dead run, having heard the noise from the great hall. He saw the blood. He saw the cup. He saw me, standing, grey-faced, holding my own arm together with my own hand, between his enemy and his dying villagers. I have never seen a man's face do what his did. The king went somewhere very far away behind his eyes, and what came back was not the king. He did not kill her. I want that recorded, because it is the most kingly thing I ever saw him do, and the most loving thing he ever did for me without touching me. He could have. The hall would have called it justice. His wolf, I think, was begging for it. I felt it through the bond that had grown between us without permission. A flare of white rage so total it stole the air from the room. But killing Ingrid would have made me a thing he avenged. And he had spent 5 years writing letters precisely so that I would never again be a thing that happened around him while he looked elsewhere. So he did it in front of the whole hall, with my blood still on the floor, while a healer bound my arm. He stripped Lady Ingrid of her name and her banner house standing, exiled her to the cold northern holdings, her father's swords forfeit to the crown, her certain future unmade, with 3 sentences in a voice that did not rise. And then, with the entire spring convocation watching, the assembled banner houses, the court that had looked through me for 4 years, he crossed the hall to where I sat, and he knelt. The strongest wolf alive went down on one knee in front of his entire kingdom, to a healer's apprentice with a bound arm and forest dirt that never quite came out from under her nails. "I have looked through you once," he said, and he did not lower his voice. He raised it so the back of the hall would hear. "I will not do it twice. I have written you a letter at the turn of every season because I was too much a coward to send one. I am done being a coward in a kingdom that requires me to be brave. About everything, except the one thing that matters. His jaw moved once, the small hitch, and then he steadied. Wren, stay. Not as a guest in the lower hall, as the woman whose chair has been empty at my table for 5 years, because I could not bring myself to fill it with anyone who was not you. The second chair. He had one too. Of course he did. I understood, kneeling height with the king of the Iron Territories, that we had each spent 5 years keeping a seat for someone we did not believe would ever come. I should tell you what broke open in me then, but I do not have the words for it, any more than he had words for what his wolf did when the wind changed. Something I had carried since the gate set itself down. Something I had been afraid to break. I kissed him in front of the whole court. It was not a long kiss, and it was not a soft one. It was 5 years of a sentence neither of us had been able to finish, finally finishing. When I pulled back, I said the only clever thing I managed in the whole of this story. You forgot to ask him for the sum, I said. So I am telling you. The sum is yes. The hall did not know what to do with itself. I have never enjoyed a silence more. We were mated under the next full moon, which the pack found scandalously fast, and I found roughly 5 years overdue. The court did not simply accept it. I want to be honest, there were banner houses who had backed Ingrid's arithmetic, and they sulked, and 2 of them tested the new Luna in small ways in the first months, a slight here, a closed door there. I had spent 4 years learning every corridor and every face in that hall as an invisible woman. It turns out that is an extraordinary education for a Luna. I knew where every body was buried because I had been the one nobody noticed walking past the graves. They stopped testing me by midsummer. The arm healed. The scar runs from wrist to elbow, pale and straight, and Soren cannot look at it without his jaw doing the small mechanical hitch, the bridge checking its own weight. I have told him to stop. He has not. I have decided to let him keep it, the way I kept the chair. We kept the cottage. This surprised the court more than the mating did, but on the turn of every season, spring thaw, high summer, first autumn cold, the hardest winter ride, the king of the Iron Territories and his Luna disappear from the hall for 3 days and ride west, to a badly built cottage on land no pack wanted, and we sit in a garden a Luna has no business weeding, and he asks me which plant is which, and I tell him, and he repeats the names back under his breath, as though he might one day be far from a healer and glad to know. This past winter, a letter came to the cottage. Not from him. From the far northern holdings, in a hand I recognised, Ingrid, older now, her certainty gone, asking nothing, only stating that she had heard the Luna had taken in her exiled younger cousin as a ward, and that she had not expected it, and did not understand it, and was grateful, in a stiff way that clearly cost her everything. I had taken the girl in. She was 11, and had Ingrid's serene certainty and none of her cruelty yet. And I had looked at her across the lower hall where she sat being invisible, and I had recognised the exact thing I had been, and I had not been able to walk past it. Soren found me reading the letter at our table, our real one, in the hall, with both chairs full now and a third pulled up for the girl. Bad news? He asked. No, I said, and I set the letter down, and I looked at the 2 chairs that had finally found the people they had been waiting for, and the third that had made room. Just arithmetic. Somebody finally got the sum right. He did not understand. I did not explain. Some things you keep. I left the pack on the night of the harvest moon without a word, and for 5 years I told myself leaving and giving up were the same thing. I was wrong. I had only ever been waiting, in a house I built with my own hands, with a chair I set for no one, to find out whether he would come. He came. That is the whole story, and it is the only one I have ever wanted to tell. Tell me, did you know, the morning the wind changed, that he would sit down? Or did you think, like I did, that if I just kept my back turned long enough, I could keep the quiet forever? Stay with me. Leave me a word below, and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if her voice has kept you company this far, subscribe and stay. There is always another season turning, and I have a great many of them left to tell you about.